Here's how the world works and why the United States and China think it's broken. In the 1940s, the United States and select Western allies established a set of rules, partnerships, and institutions to prevent another world war. This system and others like it are generally referred to as global governance. Supporters argue that the system has brought global peace and stability. Critics say that the system helps rich Western countries while ignoring the majority of the world's population. How did we get here and where are we going next? We talked to two experts to understand what each government wants the world to look like and how they're both trying to make it happen.
So I would first say that there's no single United States view of global governance. There are many different views held by many different people in different parts of the United States. One of the views is the internationalist view that sees international cooperation as potentially beneficial, that thinks that governments, companies, individuals, non-state actors can support rules and practices for very practical reasons to prevent accidents and perhaps even to promote safety, maybe long-term economic well-being. But I would say that the internationalist group thinks that human planning can build progress. And therefore, it is worthwhile to try to build rules for managing human behavior. Another category may argue that cooperation across borders is prudent because it can reduce accidents and promote safety or efficient use of resources. They may not have this view that it builds progress, but they at least have a view that it is practical. There are alternative views, focusing maybe perhaps on military or economic power, but even then, you need rules to manage interactions.
China is actually very interested in global governance. China, in recent years in particular, has seen a significant increase in attention, energy, and money being put into strengthening China's position in the global governance of various thematic areas, especially concerning emerging areas. So on technologies, for example, and also on areas that are more well established, say trade, intervention, human rights, and so on. So China has been very active in putting forward its own position in those areas. And with that, we can also see a significant increase in China expertise in engaging in international dialogue in those areas. We can see that China has been doing a lot more than what it used to. I mean, the Belt and Road Initiative is an obvious example where China is investing significantly in the realm of international development. A quote from Xi Jinping, China's top leader himself. He says, China needs to work harder to transform its economic strength into international institutional authority. Beijing's official position is that the global governance system is dominated by Western powers, especially the United States, and serves their interest in a way that is often unfair or unrepresentative. So Beijing's official line is that by taking a more proactive role in global governance, it is actually doing it not only for China's interest, but for the interest of the majority of countries in the world.
You may have countries that actually both care about global governance, but see each other as direct competitors with alternative systems. That was the case during the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. There are times when states may have fundamentally different economic or political systems, may see each other as adversaries, but they are willing to cooperate in functional areas for safety. The example there would be in civil aviation. Countries with very different political views all participate in the same civil aviation framework. You do see an opening in the 1990s as former adversaries are beginning to rethink their relationship with the creation of the Russian Federation. The other importance here are the transformations that are occurring in China. And you see in the United States and other parts of the world, a interest in seeing China becoming what's called a responsible stakeholder and encouraging China to become more active in international organization to help support things, whether it's sustainable development through other areas as well. And so you see this, what we now look back at and see as a period of optimism. Then there are political changes both in China and in the Russian Federation that change this dynamic. But I would suggest that there have been these periods when there was an opening and a possibility to reorder the world. The question is then what happens and what choices do leaders make to help facilitate cooperation or to say they're on a very different path with a very different outcomes.
The interest in global governance, I think, is a relatively new phenomenon. The significant increase really comes under Xi Jinping, and especially since around 2017, which is the year where the Chinese government under Xi really put forward the concept of building the common destiny for humankind in a very prominent way. It underlined is really a change in Beijing's strategic thinking. It no longer mainly cares about maintaining very good ties with the United States or Western countries, which was previously seen as necessary and strategic for China's economic development. But Xi Jinping's preference for China's foreign relations has changed in that he believes in reshaping the international system so that the rest of the world respect and accept China's interests in the way that Beijing defines it. The official Beijing rhetoric remains that China is forever a developing country and does what is within its capabilities. So this is, in other words, saying that, in areas where China is being challenged by other countries, especially Western powers, for not doing enough or for free riding on their efforts, say in common goods provision, Beijing is quite clear that it shouldn't be expected to bear a burden if Beijing doesn't think that it is something that China should be doing.
I anticipate a longer term rivalry between the United States and China. And the question is how to manage that. We are unlikely to return to that optimistic era of the 1990s and early 2000s when we saw opening for new relationships. However, that said, it is still important to strive for cooperation in areas of fundamental security, where even countries that are rivals recognize they have a shared common interest. The management of nuclear weapons should still be a priority for policymakers. Human technology now makes it possible to access both Earth orbit and beyond. I would suggest this is the time for states to work through multilateral mechanisms to improve their rules for interaction. The communications channels between the United States and China on possible space emergencies need to be improved. There should be a reliable hotline between the two countries, particularly to avoid satellite collisions, things that no one should want. During the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union were eventually able to develop a hotline. It's a very basic thing. Doesn't mean that you agree with the other party. It means that you're taking a practical approach. There will continue to be fundamental disagreements about political order, about a variety of topics, but finding places where there are shared interests and states can take the long view to protect the globe as a whole will be fundamental to human well-being in the future.
How would China-US relations unfold? Their relationship is very significant. Whether or not they can work together well have very significant bearing on the well-being of people from both countries and much further beyond that. I think one thing we can see from China's behavior is that China is very willing to work with other countries. China would not call them allies, but they are called partners. And we see that China, despite having the power to unilaterally do many things because of the material capabilities Beijing already have accumulated, the way it approaches global governance, I think, is in many ways very multilateral. For example, through Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, or like with African counterparts in platforms, or with Gulf Cooperation Council, and so on. So in a way, China's working with regional organizations, get their buy-in to try to make the international norms, laws, and rules and the United Nations in a way that work better for Beijing. And in some way, it mimics a classic way of US foreign policy, where US has always been working with allies and partners since the Cold War. I mean, the whole idea trying to balance and to defeat the communist Soviet Union during the Cold War is very much based on how can we work with other countries to defeat a common enemy, to achieve, a shared goal. So I think something to be considered is how the United States can work with more countries, not necessarily only Western powers, but increasingly, global South country, bringing in the idea which China is very good at and the US has a strong tradition in doing of working with other countries to achieve common aims. So this is in some ways talking about smart and good diplomacy and in understanding that in today's world, multilateralism has just gotten so much broader.
Multilateralism is a phrase that the United States helped coin and promote since 1945. One of the issues that's a live issue in many countries is actually how to continue to realize one system of international affairs. That said, there are very different views of to what extent countries should be part of the global body versus the regional body. I would suggest that engagement in multilateral organizations has been a key strand of American foreign policy for over a century. However, there are other strands as well, which include isolationism. And I think that now, at a time of change, one of the reasons we're seeing such volatility is the realization amongst policymakers and the public that it's much harder to deliver the benefits that people need from international affairs. Fundamental changes in technology have radically changed the economy. The introduction of automation that has basically eliminated many manufacturing jobs over the past 2 generations is now being followed by the arrival of artificial intelligence, which will have an impact on the knowledge-based industries. Voters and leaders are aware that the world is changing around them, and they are unsure about what mechanisms can be used to manage that change and to protect their livelihoods and families. That makes people wary and also means that we're searching for new systems. And so the question is now is how do we think about governance and global governance? How can the debate about global governance, what are the stakes for managing our world for generations to come? A world that's getting warmer because of climate change, where jobs and economic certainty are not what they were for current and previous generations, where we are reminded sadly and tragically that pandemics do exist despite the best in modern medication. We have real challenges, and as people and policymakers seek out answers, they may retreat into their shells or they may seek to work with others to try to overcome these problems. We will see which choices people make, but I would suggest that the efforts to try to cooperate despite profound philosophical and political differences might provide the long-term answers.
China is not the only country that is not happy about significant aspects of global governance system. I mean, in many ways, the United States is not happy about significant aspects of that too. Like, for example, the Trump administration has a lot of criticisms about collective defense system. And if you talk about European powers, I mean, they also have their concerns about economic globalization. And other global south countries, they have their views on, say, IMF or human rights. So this is to say that what China is doing is interesting and important, especially because China is trying to do it systematically. And also China is a great power with the material capabilities to do it. This is one level. The other level is what China wants to achieve, which is to make the global governance system one that works better for China, is a goal shared by many countries. Although their idea on what works better for them can be different from what China thinks work better for China. And in some ways they can clash. China is distinctive at some level, but at another level, it isn't. So this is to say that global governance system, I think there's a general agreement that many things need to be changed. This is a matter of negotiation and diplomacy. And I think various countries can come together to have a greater say in that with a view on bringing in the voice of global south countries much more than before, when the first normative assumptions on global governance or normative rules were being set out right after the Second World War. The involvement of the global south were not that front and center. I think to avoid it being a zero-sum game of different countries, going into global south as a strategic space, there can be a much more constructive and cooperative exercise of various powers, middle powers especially, taking the lead in really talking to the global south on negotiations on different things that they think can work better for them, so that collectively more common grounds can be found.